Welcome. I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore another opportunity, another way to drive success in your business. Before we get started, I always remind you, grab a notepad, grab a pen. Today, I think you're going to take a few notes, but I want you to commit every day to taking away at least one actionable item, something that you can implement in your business today. So let's get started. I'm forever harping on the idea of the relentless need to drive value for your product or service, to drive value for your customers in your products and services. And I have reviewed many times that there's 4 primary ways to drive value. And they are an improved customer experience, quality of your product, pricing, and convenience. And those are in no particular order. And we've covered in other videos a little bit more on that. But what I'd like to do today is give you a way that you can actually drive value through those things. So just as you should be relentless in terms of trying to drive value, you should look at being relentless in trying to eliminate waste. And then theoretically, I suppose you can never eliminate waste, or what the Japanese refer to as Muda, but you should be relentless in trying to reduce waste. The reduction of waste will result in improved quality and a better customer experience and better pricing because your expenses will go down and you'll find everything more convenient, I suppose. So let's look at that. What are the 7 plus 1 bonus at the end? What are the 7 forms of waste? The 7 forms of Muda as defined initially by Toyota in the Toyota production system, the Toyota way, and their management style. But this applies to every single business. It doesn't matter whether you manufacture products, you sell retail products, what your service is. You can find value by reducing waste and trying relentlessly pursuing the elimination of waste, even though, as I said, it's theoretically impossible to completely eliminate waste. But every step you take towards the elimination, which is the reduction steps, you're going to drive value. So the 7 forms in no particular order. The first one is waiting. So waiting is a form of waste. Now let's define waiting. I know you know what waiting means, but in the context of waste, I like to define waiting as the passage of time until conditions sufficiently exist to create value or productivity. Okay, so think about that. Time is passing and you're not productive. Time is passing and you're not creating value. That's what we're referring to as waiting. And everybody hates to wait. I actually went to the, what would be commonly called the motor vehicles department, Department of Motor Vehicles in the United States, or the registries, the registry office. And the waiting was killing me. And you've all experienced waiting, even at a restaurant. There's the famous Seinfeld episode of them waiting for a table at the Chinese restaurant. There is the concept of going to an amusement park and waiting to get onto one of the attractions. Waiting is terrible. It's terrible for customers, but it's terrible anywhere in your business. So anytime throughout your process, and I want you to think about the entire logistics of your business as we go through these and try to give examples, jot down examples of where this waste exists in your business. Where is waiting occurring? Where is time passing while sufficient conditions exist in order to create value or productivity? So where is time passing and you're not being productive? Now, I witnessed the other day, I was in a parking lot and I was waiting, and I witnessed that next door there was a construction site. They were re-roofing a school, and this semi truck pulled up with a whole bunch of roofing materials that the workers were going to use, and he got situated and everything, and then he parked. Well, I had my appointment and I came out later and I was surprised that the truck hadn't moved. It wasn't in the location that it was going to be necessary to conveniently transport the roofing materials off the bed of the truck onto the roof, but it hadn't moved at all. The driver was still there. So there was waiting occurring there, and it's very wasteful. It just automatically, intuitively occurs to me that the owner of the business and the property is paying for that waiting in some way. That's built into the price of being able to put on the roof. Now, if somehow they were able to have the driver and the equipment and tools that are all involved, if they were productive in the meantime, then that would have reduced the cost. It would have reduced the wastefulness of the waiting. But in fact, what is so often the case you see in construction is that while somebody is waiting for their opportunity to become productive, they're waiting for another part of the process to occur so that they need to get involved, they're unproductive completely, and there's no value added at all. So that's the first form. Waiting is the first form of waste. The next one is motion or movement. And you may think, well, how is that wasteful? Anytime you have to move, you're wasting time, and there's waste inherent in the system. So imagine that you are performing a particular task and you have to reach way far over here to get one ingredient or one part of the one of the raw materials in order for the production or whatever it is. The movement that needs to occur of the workers or the equipment, all of that stuff takes time and it takes up space, and that's wasteful because time costs money and space costs money. So motion, if you can reduce the amount of motion. Even think about a box. Let's say you order something from Amazon and the box arrives and there's all those, air packages in there taking up space. There's extra motion that occurs there. So just to pack the box, if it was the exact right size, you can imagine the efficiency with which a worker or a robot could put something in the box. But because there's extra space, there's more motion that occurs. So in order to eliminate the motion, they have to put in some extra packing materials, and there's motion involved in doing that. So it's like waste begets more waste. And so think of the number 2 one and think in your business, how is motion wasteful in your business? How can you eliminate motion? In the example that I think of that I saw a Toyota video, I think if you Google this, you can find, I think it had to do with a food bank during the Sandy Hook hurricane issue years ago. And Toyota had sent some people from their production system, management team members, to go down and assist with the food bank in the distribution of food to the people who had been displaced or were in need because of the hurricane. And the first thing they looked at was how the line was set up, how they package these dry and canned goods into boxes, and all the motion that was occurring to get that done. People were walking back and forth, and then the next one, they're doing some conveyance as well, transportation. I'll get into that in a sec. But even having the box too big creates more motion. You have to move things more in the box. And what they did was they just reduced the line. They made it more efficient so people weren't moving around as much. Far less motion occurred, and they just timed how long it took to pack a box. You can watch the video. I won't describe the whole thing to you, but you really should think of examples anytime you can eliminate motion in your business. And I always do this. I apply these things in everyday life. So if I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking something, let's say I'm ladling something out of a mixing bowl into another pot where it's got to combine with other ingredients or whatever. Sometimes I'll notice that the two bowls or whatever are too far apart. And I'll always think to myself, okay, well, there's motion there. There's waste. I push them together and there's not drips that occur on the counter. And, that's wasteful having to clean that up. And it's just way quicker and everything. So motion is the second one. The third form of waste is conveyance. And this is related to motion, but it's now where you're transporting people or goods from one location to another. So of course it's motion, so therefore there's waste, but transporting things from one location to another. So if you imagine that you were creating a particular widget and your raw materials were stored in a warehouse and you had to pick them up from the warehouse and move them to where the workers who are actually assembling the widgets were, that's conveyance, and that's wasteful. And you can imagine the further away it is, the more conveyance, the further distance of the conveyance, the more wasteful. So when you just think of conveyance and transport of people and items to particular locations in order for them to be productive, in order for them to add value in the process, if they have to be conveyed and transported from one location to another, that's wasteful. So every time you can shorten the distance and eliminate a part of the conveyance and the necessity for conveyance, that's better. Another example would be bringing workers to a particular job site. So maybe there's a construction site that's outside of town and everybody has to stay in town, and maybe it's a long drive. So they have to convey the workers from their motels or their residences inside the city out to the job site every day. That's conveyance. It's very wasteful. And in some construction industries, they actually create camps right on the premise where they're going to be doing the work, and they avoid the conveyance so people can get a little extra sleep in the morning before they start work or whatever it happens to be. Conveyance is wasteful. How are you transporting goods, materials, and people around in order to facilitate your product or service? Any way you can eliminate that will add value. All right. The fourth one is over-processing. So within your production system, within your logistical process of moving your product or service from point A to point B or point Z with your customer, do you add any steps that do not add sufficient value to really be significant in the customer's mind? And I would define that as a form of over-processing. I think of a personal example where I was very proud of this particular gravy that I was making. And I had the chicken, I cooked a whole chicken, and then I would remove the meat, and then I would let the rest of the chicken bones that had a little bit of meat left on them, I'd let them slow cook for a long time, and I would add some herbs and spices and this kind of thing. But then because all the meat would come off the bone and everything, and it would have a rich broth and everything, it was great, but it took a lot of processing to remove all the tiny little bones and everything. And I was lamenting on this in front of somebody one time, and he said, yeah, that's a form of over-processing, because I'm not sure the people who are enjoying the gravy really notice that. And so I thought about it, and then in my successive times of making this gravy, I actually didn't go to the point where it required so much work, and I didn't get any complaints. I'm not sure that people really notice the difference. I could, but does your customer really notice the difference in the value, in the perception of value? Now, that's a tricky one. And in that example, you might say, well, I have some proprietary methods that absolutely add value, and that is what separates me from the competition. Of course, that wouldn't be defined as over-processing if in fact it is doing a good job of building value and your customers notice something. Even if they can't pinpoint what it is, they notice that it's better. That's not over-processing. What I'm saying is if it fails to add significant value in a way that's meaningful and a customer is prepared to pay more for it, or prepared to go out of their way for it. In other words, select your product or service over the competition. That's over-processing. Another way to think of over-processing, depending again on the context of your business, is if you have extraneous, superfluous activity necessary because of improper techniques and tools. So maybe you're using a bad tool. And I think of, I'm not a woodworker, but I quite enjoy watching the woodworking shows and things like that. And so somebody may have a plane a manual planer or maybe some kind of rasp, and they are removing pieces of wood. And then another person to do that same job maybe uses a router, and he's got a particular jig set up. He's got it set up so it's perfect every time. There's very little variation from one result to another, and it's excellent work at the end. So there's an example of over-processing by using maybe an inferior tool or process in your system. So ask yourself, in what ways can you innovate to eliminate over-processing, where each step, every activity that you take in production actually adds value. Anytime you are doing something that doesn't add value, or it's not the most efficient method for adding value, it is wasteful. And in this case, we're going to call that over-processing. Remove the over-processing. The next one is defects. So of course, we talked about adding value by increasing quality. Everything is subject to defects. This is not a perfect world. Sometimes the equipment doesn't behave as predicted, and very often people don't behave as expected and predicted. So you need to factor in that you're going to have defects, but you have to measure your defects. And a defect in a product or service, that just you can imagine all the ways that it results in waste. You have a customer that you need to satisfy. So maybe your customer experienced your defect and you didn't know about it. He didn't tell you, and he just never purchases from you again. He never calls you up again to get service. Or if the customer does complain and you are a good business and you stand behind your product or service, and now you have to do quality control and you have to do the work over again. Maybe you have to provide a whole new product, and you can see there's waste where a defective product is now, it's waste. It may be garbage. It may not be able to be, it certainly cannot be used 100% again. Even if it can, there's waste because it now has to be reprocessed and go through some sort of reconditioning and reprocessing in order to make it not defective rather. So defects are very wasteful, and anything you can do to improve quality through your processes and your techniques, your engineering, your planning, your setup, your production system of any kind to lower defects, the number of defects, is going to add value. So make sure you're counting defects. If you are just making it right every time, and you're not going out of your way to figure out why, what's at the root cause of the defects, you're going to experience continual waste, and that's very inefficient. Your competition is going to beat you. Remember, we're doing this relentless pursuit of increasing value, this relentless pursuit of the reduction of waste is in order to give you a competitive advantage and more profit. You're going to be more successful. The next form of waste is inventory. Any kind of inventory is wasteful. And one of the primary reasons why inventory is wasteful is because of the concept of obsolescence of inventory. Inventory will expire. It has an expiration date. It takes up resources. Even if you have a non-perishable form of inventory, you might say that I have a particular raw material that doesn't degrade and it can sit there forever, but still it's taking up resources, it's taking up space. So the inventory of all those raw materials is costing you in terms of space that you need. Space is not free. And inventory that takes up space also probably means that it needs to be conveyed from one point to another. And there's motion involved. And so there's a lot of ways in which inventory can create waste and leads to waste. And we're not just talking about raw materials. Any subcomponent of your final product that has an inventory is wasteful. So if you were creating, upstream widget A that is going to be assembled later into widget B and so on, and you set up your line wrong such that you were overproducing inventory of widget A, now it's sitting there as inventory and it's wasteful while it waits to be put into production here. So consider the concept of obsolescence or the expiration of inventory. And people who have perishable inventory, such as in food production and other things like that, or even fast fashion, there's seasonality in retail stores. Inventory is wasteful. Everyone who runs a business understands what I'm talking about here, but I want you to focus on it. I want you to think about what inventories do you have, and not just the inventory that you sell, but the inventory of everything. Do you have too much printer paper, and why do you have that? These things take up space and they detract from the efficiency of your operation. So inventory is very wasteful. So we've covered 6. We had waiting, motion, conveyance, over-processing, defects, and inventory. The 7th form of waste is overproduction. I almost said over-processing again. Overproduction. Overproduction is considered the worst form of waste, because inherent in overproduction is inherent in production, and certainly in overproduction, are all the other forms of Muda, of waste. So if you have inventory as part of your production, any overproduction means that you have more inventory, or you had inventory necessary. If you have overproduction and there was conveyance involved in your production system, that means in order to have something overproduced, you had more conveyance. So overproduction is all about supply and demand. If you are producing a product or service in a capacity that exceeds the demand that's available, it's wasteful, because of all the other forms of waste we just described that are involved. And because there is a lack of productivity when you can't exchange your goods or services and trade them for value, a commensurate value exchange of some sort in a market economy. So you produce with sufficient demand and you provide your product or service to your target market, to your customers. And if you do that in a proportion and you have capacities that line up really closely with demand, then it's not wasteful. The more you overproduce something, you're going to have more defects. You're going to have more conveyance, motion. There's more waiting involved and all that. So think of overproduction. Are you overproducing? I realize that's a balancing act, and it's very tricky, because I would also argue that any time that your customer demand exceeds your capacity to be able to provide for that demand, you're losing business. And I've also said that you should always be growing. So you want to try to plan very carefully to have your production scale up to match the demand as closely as possible. And you should maybe exceed the demand a little bit. Remember, I said this concept is theoretical insofar as it's impossible to completely eliminate waste. I mean, we're not living in a perfect world. You're not a perfect person. I'm not a perfect person. And our business and our production system is not going to be perfect. So we're aspiring to get better and better, perpetually refine, continually improve the process. So overproduction is the worst form. Look at that first maybe, and look at all the other ways that you are involving inherently more waste in your production system, and therefore it's compounding in terms of overproduction. I told you there'd be a bonus, an 8th form of waste, and I would say that this is actually the worst one. Now, traditionally, there's been 7 defined as part of the Toyota production system, the Toyota way. The 8th one, think of it as the untapped potential of your team members. The lack of leveraging the human resources that you have at your disposal. There's a quote someone said, and I paraphrase it, I don't know it exactly, and I'm sorry I can't attribute it to who actually said it, but it was something along the lines of, for 30 years, my company put my hands to work. If they had only asked, they could have had my mind as well. So that sort of summarizes the idea of the 8th and worst, in my opinion, form of waste, and that is untapped potential of your team members. Are you utilizing your team and the resources at your disposal, the human resources at your disposal, as much as you possibly can? And the way to do that is to create mechanisms through which they can give you feedback. You have to, I guess, first create a culture. I'm not sure, it's a chicken and an egg situation. Your mechanisms, your processes to solicit feedback from your team, create the culture, and what helps to perpetuate that is the rewards and how you incent your people and pat them on the back for giving their input. So you want to tap into the ideas, the creativity, the various talents, you name it. Some people are very skilled at organization. Some are really good with math. Some are really strong and muscular, or they might be dexterous and they can do things really well with their hands. You want to explore what everyone's strengths are. And as we've said in other videos, you want to leverage your strengths, but you also want to leverage the strengths of everyone on your team. Don't pigeonhole people into a particular job description and then decide that anything outside of that is off limits. That is a mistake. There are people who are doing task A or job B who would really be able to give you some great ideas on how you can improve your production, how you can increase your value in all other ways in your business. And you have to create this culture where people know that you expect that of them and you encourage that of them and that you reward that in some way. And so create a mechanism to do that. So those are the 8 forms of waste. And insofar as you can eliminate this, the degree to which you can eliminate waste will be proportionate to increasing the value for your customers. I'm curious what you jotted down and what you're going to implement today. Please put some notes in the comments. What are the worst forms of waste in your business and why? What has been very pernicious and what things sort of just creep up without you realizing that they become very wasteful? I have a reputation around my household for being very intolerant of waste, in particular food waste. I don't know, it was the way I was raised, but it's worse over the years. And I just really want to make sure we use everything. And so I look at these things and I think you should memorize all 8 of these and just sort of make a culture of it. Practice these things around your home. In fact, I'm inspired. I'm going to do a video. I will create a production system in my home of some sort, in the kitchen, of doing a particular kitchen task. And then I will do it one way, and then we will kind of explore how could we improve upon it? In what ways is the system I set up wasteful? And in what ways does it inherently contain those 7 types of waste that we defined? And get some ideas. Start thinking, how can you eliminate waste in your business? Please leave a comment. Let's share, let's discuss, let's deliberate, let's debate, and let's help and learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.